How's it going, my bakers? Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll show you how to make a classic cold fermented freestanding loaf with a nice ear. So let's go to the kitchen and get started. The no-knead and cold fermentation methods are here to stay. And I'll just keep using them as long as the breads turn out the way I want them to. And here's another fine example of that. A moderately high hydration loaf with a little bit of whole wheat, some seeds, 24 hours in the fridge, couple of folds and a nice tight final shape, slashed in the right place at the right angle, baked with steam. The resulting bread is a beautiful little loaf with a nice little ear. All we need to do to make this is give it a couple of folds, pop it in the fridge and forget about it. Sometimes I love to tuck into a bread like this one, fresh from the oven whilst it's still a little bit warm. I know usually I suggest leaving it to cool down, but sometimes a piece of warm bread with a little bit of butter and a sprinkling of sea salt is just the best thing ever. So let me show you how to make it. Starting with the ingredients. We'll need some white bread flour, whole wheat flour, yeast, salt, water and some seeds. I'm using sunflower seeds and brown linseeds. You can use any seeds that you want. You can toast them too for extra flavor. Just make sure they cool down before you use them. Equipment wise, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe and something to slash our loaf with. A curved razor blade like this one works perfectly, but you can use a sharp knife too. We'll need some kind of final proofing basket. This one measures at about 22 centimeters or 8.5 inches across. If you don't have a proofing basket, you can use a loaf tin lined with a piece of cloth. For baking, I'm using my cast iron combo cooker. This is the best tool for baking a loaf like this at home. It bakes it evenly from all sides, but more importantly, it traps steam inside and prevents the loaf from drying out too soon. That'll make it rise taller. If you don't have a cast iron pan like this, you can use a spray bottle with water to moisten the loaf and to steam the chamber of the oven. Okay, let's get to making our dough. First things first, temperature control. My kitchen is around 22 degrees Celsius or about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm aiming for a final dough temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Since we're using the no-knead method, the dough is not going to warm up too much. So my water is right about the same temperature as the final dough temperature. In a large bowl, combine the water, the yeast, the salt, the seeds and the whole wheat flour. And then give it all a good mix. You want to dissolve the salt completely, make sure all the ingredients are dispersed evenly. You can of course mix with your dough scraper or with a spatula, but a whisk works really well here. I know I didn't mention it in the equipments list, and that's because it's not an essential tool. Okay, after mixing it all up, add the final ingredient, the white bread flour. Then grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. It'll be loose, sticky and soggy, but that's normal, that's exactly how it should be. It's a relatively high hydration, we're using seeds, we're using whole wheat flour, all of that contributes to this texture. You always want to handle dough like this with wet hands. Okay, let's get it in a clean bowl and take its temperature. 25 degrees Celsius, what we were aiming for, 25 degrees Celsius is what we got. If your dough is warmer, don't worry about it, simply shorten the folding intervals. I'm gonna leave my dough in the fridge for 30 minutes, if yours is warmer, you can fold it after 15. And for folding, I've come up with a slightly different method. This dough is not quite heavy enough to perform a coil fold, and I also didn't want to place it on the table and make a mess. So this is what I did. I wet my hands with water, released the dough from the bowl, then picked it up and folded it in the air. So what you want to do is push the sides of the dough down and then back up into itself. And turn it as you do that. It's basically like the regular fold on the table, but upside down. And once the dough ball's nice and tight, place it back into the bowl and back into the fridge to cool down for another 30 minutes. After the second chilling stage, we can give this dough the second fold. And it's exactly the same as the first one. Wet your hands, pick the dough up, then push the sides down and back up into the middle. The whole cold bulk fermentation stage of this dough will take 24 hours. When I'm making a stretchier dough, a dough with a higher hydration, what I like to do is place it into the fridge in the evening and then the next morning give it one more fold. Leaving it in the fridge for 24 hours and then shaping it could result in a overly loose dough. Giving it an extra fold in the morning of the day of final shaping will ensure that it's just a little bit tighter, which is especially important for good oven spring. Okay, after the third fold, it can go back into the fridge to finish the 24-hour cold fermentation. And it doesn't matter when you do the third fold, as long as it's on the same day of baking. Right, 24 hours are up and our dough has puffed up real nice. It is well fermented and full of gas. But before we do the final shaping, we'll do a quick pre-shape. And the purpose of this, of course, is for building tension. So dust your dough with flour, tip it out on the table with the smooth side down, If it feels a little bit sticky, you can dust the bottom of it too, dust your hands, flatten the dough out gently, and then fold it over on each side. Take the bottom third and fold it up, take the top third and fold it down. And finally, cross the two sides over in the middle. It is not a very tight pre-shaping, but will be a good foundation for the final shape. Now cover the dough up and leave it to rest for 20 minutes. During this time the gluten will relax sufficiently for us to perform the final shape effectively. Once again, dust the dough with flour because it is a little bit sticky. Flip it upside down, flatten it out once more, just as you did earlier. We will use the stitching method for final shaping. It will make the dough nice and tight. And this is how it goes. Fold the bottom up, then cross over the two bottom corners in the middle. If you feel your hands sticking, rub them against the table in the flour. Now grab the top of the dough and fold it down about halfway. Now here comes the stitching part. Using both hands, pull the dough out sideways, starting from the top. Then cross it over in the middle. Keep doing this until you reach the bottom. And I guess you can see now why this is called the stitching method. Okay, finally, we need to roll the dough up into a loaf, starting from the bottom up to the top. Imagine how many little layers we just created. It should feel nice and tight in your hands as you do this. To finish the shaping, you can pinch the ends together, or you can leave them as they are, it's up to you. If you don't pinch the ends together, they will end up with little swirls. To prevent the loaf from sticking to the basket, I'm going to coat it with some flour. What I used to do is dust the basket instead of dusting the loaf. Dusting the basket results in a more uneven coating of flour on the loaf. I think dusting the loaf is a much better method. Rub the flour in, shake off the excess, and then place the loaf with the smooth side down into the basket. Now clean the mess, and this thing is ready for the final proof. Cover it up so it doesn't dry out. And just for reference, my kitchen is around 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I've made this loaf a couple of times and it's taken me about an hour to an hour and a half. You do not want it to double in size. It must reach its full potential in the oven, not on the table. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat the oven, 250 degrees Celsius, fan on. And also preheat your baking vessel if you're using one. And that'll be 480 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, once the dough is puffed up and has a little nice wobble to it, it's ready. Get the hot pan out of the oven, make sure you don't burn your table, drop the loaf gently into the middle of the pan, and then slash it using a razor blade or a sharp knife. Cut it at an angle, and place the cut on one side and not in the middle. Go about 2 centimeters deep, which is about 0.8 inches. Now cover the loaf and pop it into the oven. As soon as it goes in the oven, turn the temperature down to 220 degrees Celsius. And that is 430 Fahrenheit. Bake the loaf for 25 minutes with the lid on. Then remove the pan from the oven. Then remove the lid from the pan and pop the loaf back into the oven for another 10 minutes of baking. I decided to use the fan in the oven this time on a higher temperature bake, which I usually don't, but it really helped to brown the crust evenly all over. If your oven doesn't have a fan, increase the temperature by about 10%. And there you go. That's how you make a cold fermented, no-knead, freestanding loaf with some seeds, with some whole wheat, and with a nice little ear. It has a nice crispy crust, a nice sturdy crumb, which is still super soft and springy, and it's got loads of flavor. It will go well with any sandwich filling, sweet or savory. But don't go anywhere. Let me show you what happens when you score the loaf right down the middle. And I'm not saying this is a rule. This applies to a recipe like this one. If you slash it right down the middle, the loaf might not end up with a nice ear on one side or the other. Instead, it'll have two smaller, equally sized ears on both sides. Now, if this was a high hydration loaf, if it was nice and tight, you could score it right down the middle, and it might just end up with two beautiful ears on either side. But when it comes to this recipe, if you slash it right down the middle, the ears will be pretty small. But to be fair, this loaf looks pretty good too. I like it. So it's up to you. You can slash yours down the middle, you can slash it on the side, or you can try both. No matter how you cut it, it'll still taste amazing. So what do you think of this recipe? Do you ever make bread like this? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.